Okay, thank you very much. So you heard about me, and I just have to say that if my mother knew that I was speaking at an event that was called Fuckup Nights, she wouldn't be happy. And it's, I mean, this is not an Israeli thing. Like in Hebrew, you know, asiti fuck, or fuck, or emish fuck bakatavazu, that's like perfectly okay. That's not swearing, right? Right? But in English, like if you were invited to a garden party at Buckingham Palace, and you said to the Queen, "Your Majesty, you have no idea how difficult it was for me to get here. What a fuck up I had trying to find parking," right? They'd kick you out the palace, right? So, and you know, I actually do tend to swear a little bit, but this is certainly the first time that I've said fuck in a speech publicly, and it's very troubling. Okay. Not only that, I've been asked to come here and like detail. I'm going to go with screw up from now on. Okay, I'm sorry. No, don't you think screw up? It's like screw up, right? Okay, I'll stick with the fuck up. It's okay. Okay, and I want to say something slightly serious. And I'm going to say something even more serious later. But you know, journalism, by definition, it's very difficult to do journalism without screwing up. What do you think? Is there like a limit to how many times? It's like if you say fuck too many times in a speech, that's not. Don't you think? And have I gone too far already? But you're okay. But like, and there's people taping this and everything. I had to do it. That was the framework in which I was asked to speak. I had to say the F word. But journalism, by definition, we're in an age where people need to know what's happening all the time, as you may have gathered. And all of you, none of you has turned off your phones or anything. And believe me, my phone is on silent, but it's not turned off. I understand. We need to know what's going on. We need to know second by second. So you have to be fast, right? But when you're really fast in journalism, what's a likely casualty? Well, accuracy, right? You can't be fast and you can't be perfectly fast and perfectly accurate. You can't do it. And therefore, any journalist will tell you that we have had endless screw-ups, right? Endless screw-ups. I'm not saying that word anymore in the whole rest of my speech. Endless errors, endless mistakes, right? And that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about one of the most serious mistakes of that. A few years ago, at the outbreak of the Second Lebanon War, I published something in the newspaper I was editing at the time that was censored. And I thought, I know it's censored now, but by the time people get the newspaper in the morning, it won't be censored anymore, and I can't be like 9 hours out of date or whatever it was. So we published something, and it was still censored the next morning, believe me. And that's just, and I don't want to talk about it now publicly, but you can ask me afterwards if you like. But the point is, speed and accuracy, very, very difficult, and that's an imperative for journalism, and that creates screw-ups. Okay, so that was my first digression. Okay, well, I'm going to talk to you tonight about something. By the way, how many Brits in the room, just out of interest? Okay, how many Americans in the room? How many Israelis in the room? Okay, so, okay, good. We're all, most of us are Israeli. I'm much more Israeli than I am British. You might find it hard to believe after those first few seconds, but I've lived here for most of my life. How many Beatles fans in the room? Good, because my story is about the Beatles, and nobody got hurt, okay? So it's not like hugely sensitive. Nobody was even horrified, but it was lousy journalism, okay? And it underlines a point I want to make later. So you heard I've interviewed lots of interesting and famous people, but for all the Obamas and the Netanyahus, the most famous person I've ever interviewed, I think, is Sir Paul McCartney, who I think you'd say has been famous for longer and further, you know, than pretty much anybody else on earth, right? I think most people have heard of Paul McCartney, and this was a phone interview. I don't know how many went to Paul McCartney when he played in Parc Aircon in 2008. Some people, okay, some people. It was about 10 years ago. Paul McCartney comes to Israel. I interviewed him over the phone before he came to Israel. I was in Jerusalem. He was in his studio in the UK, right? So we're just going to, Oren, you're going to play us a little excerpt of the interview so you know that this indeed happened. We hope.
I'm great, and it's
He's the one with the Liverpudlian accent.
It's David Horovitz. I'm the editor of the Jerusalem Post. I have to tell you, my sister and my mum were in the enthralled masses at Hammersmith Odeon in 1965.
I remember them well.
all they could hear was screaming, they said.
I know, that's all we could hear too.
My sister watched a tape of it not long ago, and she's just started crying just watching it. It's astounding.
You know, I must say, even though we couldn't hear anything, it was pretty exciting times.
Yeah, you know, and you're the soundtrack to my children's lives as well. My daughter, who's 11, has just started learning bass, and she's learning Let It Be. That's the first thing that they've got her working on.
Wow, it is fabulous. We never ever thought that it would last this long. But, you know, it's a great tribute that it has lasted and that kids play it these days. I'm very proud of that fact.
Okay, so that's, now you know that it's true, although I'm sure you believe me anyway. So that's Paul with a Liverpudlian accent down the phone to me. And before the interview, I've been trying to like rack my brains, what can I ask Paul McCartney that he hasn't been asked before, right? It had been 45 years then since their first #1s. He'd been asked everything. So I asked him about the threats he'd had about coming to play in Israel, and he was very easygoing about that. I asked him a little bit about religion. He thought of himself, he said, as spiritual rather than religious. His daughter Mary had just had a baby. He said, I see that as a miracle. We talked a bit about his songs. And when we ended the interview, he very sweetly said he wanted to ask me a couple of things. So he asked me, first of all, would Israelis know most of his material, even like the not so famous stuff? And I said, like, they've been playing nothing but your songs on the radio for weeks here, Paul. Don't worry, people will know your songs. And then he asked, and this was pretty cool, he said, would people understand him when he was talking between the songs, when he was explaining things? Would they understand his English? Would they understand his Liverpudlian English? First of all, I thought that was so nice. This guy is a global superstar, and he really cared that people would understand everything he was saying. I told him, for sure, he has a rare accent in Israel, the Liverpudlian one, but this country speaks English. So he said, great, okay, well, shalom, and we ended the interview. And he played this wonderful concert a few days later, and he spoke a lot of Liverpudlian English and a little bit of Hebrew, including when he introduced a song called My Love, he dedicated it to his late beloved first wife, Linda, and he said, I dedicate Hashir Hazeh LaLinda. That's what he said. Okay, which brings me finally to the fuck up one more time, fine. What I should have asked Paul McCartney about and didn't, right? What were the questions I could have asked him that nobody to my knowledge has ever asked him, and that would have been the perfect questions for Paul McCartney about to play his first concert in the Jewish state. So I don't know if any of you are smarter than me or ahead of me. I hope so. What I should have asked him about and didn't was Linda and their children. Why? Because more specifically, it was Linda Eastman, daughter of Leonard Epstein and Louise Lindner. Okay, she was his first beloved wife, was the New York-born child of a Russian-born Jewish father and a German-born Jewish mother. Right? His first wife, couldn't have been more Jewish. And so the 3 children that they had together were Jewish, right? Mary, photographer, Mary McCartney. Stella McCartney, hugely successful fashion designer. James McCartney, musician. Jewish, Jewish, and Jewish. Some of them are in that picture. Okay, I don't know what Paul would have told me about the impact, if any, on his life of having a Jewish wife and Jewish kids. I don't know what he would have told me about the effect that would have had on the way they were raised. Did they light Shabbat candles? Did they keep Yom Kippur? Did they care about Israel? Did they study their mother's Jewish heritage? Was any of that a factor in his decision to come and play in Israel? I'm sure you can think of lots more questions along those lines. And if we don't know the answers to any of them, that's at least partly because it didn't occur to me to ask. Okay, so like I said, nobody got hurt and it wasn't terrible, but it's a pretty serious screw up, right? I'm interviewing one of the most famous people on earth. He's coming to Israel. He had a Jewish wife. He has Jewish kids. We don't know much about that, partly because I missed the chance to ask him. So what did I learn from the experience? Well, first of all, to prepare a little better for interviews. Okay, that's a lesson that all the journalists in the room, should bear in mind. Prepare properly, do your homework. I want to say something a little bit serious now about the lesson and about sort of wider impact in journalism and so on, right? That resonates beyond some unasked questions to a musical superstar. And that's about information. I failed to extract information. Our job in journalism is to extract information so that people can understand the world better, understand what's being done on our behalf by the people who we choose to run our lives, right? But our profession, this journalism thing that we do, is being castigated right now. We're being called enemies of the people, no less, by the President of the United States. And you know what you're supposed to do against your enemies, right? So I'd say that's a pretty dangerous use of rhetoric. And our leaders here in this country also, many of them, constantly attacking the media. We're not perfect, we make mistakes, but the assault on media is an assault on all of us' capacity to know what our leaders are up to. We're the servants of the people, not the enemy. So we journalists better make sure we ask the right questions, and all of us who care about democracy better make sure we keep a media that's independent, fair, and able to watch our leaders on behalf of us all. On which note, thank you. Yes, that was the heavy part. On which note, I want to end with a little quotation I'm going to sing, which is probably a really bad idea, from Paul McCartney, okay? So along with my worries about journalism, I'm kind of worried about the world and about how extreme and intolerant and angry people are getting. Not in this room, but I think there's a lot of intolerance and polarization. And wisdom, it seems to me, generally lies between the extremes, and nuance is pretty critical. So exactly 50 years ago, Paul McCartney wrote these words in a song. Forgive me, Paul, for trying to sing this. See the people standing there who disagree and never win, and wonder why they don't get in my door. Some of you'll know that song. It was a little plea for tolerance, I think, from Paul McCartney. Now, the Beatles here, of whom you are many in the room, will know that the lyrics of that come from a song called Fixing a Hole. And by the most amazing coincidence, I promise you, I looked up the lyrics before I realized this. That song was actually recorded 50 years ago today. February the 21st, 1967, is when the Beatles did the final recording of Fixing a Hole. So, a 50-year-old song lyric, rarely more important than now, in my opinion. That is my one more time fuck up story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. So by raising your hand and standing up, please, if you have any questions.
Why don't you send your question to Paul McCartney first? Why don't you send your question to Paul McCartney fixing a hole 50 years up?
You know what? So that's what I'm going to do, right? It's 50 years since the song. Dear Paul, why don't I send my questions that I failed to ask 9 years ago to Paul McCartney? So I'm going to, okay? I'm going to say, I screwed up. It's 50 years since you wrote Fixing a Hole. I'm coming back to you with some Jewish questions, so Paul. And if he answers, I'll write about it and you'll know about it. That's fine.
There was also someone from the back over there.
Who's going to ask the exact same question?
Who's got? And clerk, please.
What would you ask to Trump?
What will your question be to President Donald Trump? One question.
One question?
One question.
Why? That would be my question.
No, so first of all, I'll repeat the question because I'll give you more time to think of an answer. What if I had one question? What would I ask the American President Donald Trump? I wouldn't agree to an interview on that basis. I don't, if you had to in your press conference, then like the nice journalist asked him the other day about bomb hoaxes at JCCs and so on. So you choose the question of the hour. But I would love to interview Donald Trump as I would want to interview anybody who's going to influence our lives. And there are lots of questions that I would want to ask him. Endless questions that I could tell you now. But obviously I'd want to ask him Israel-related questions and so on, and the questions that impact the people who are going to be reading, the material that I write. I think we're going through a really interesting period. I'll come back and I'll say if I had the one question, I would say, do you really think it's wise to be using some of the language that you're using where journalists are concerned? But that's a very self-interested question. But maybe I'll get the chance. I interviewed Obama when he came here. He was a candidate in 2008. And it was a really interesting interview, and it I think many of the things that he did as president, where Israel was concerned, were obvious in that first interview. He said, for example, I asked him, when Bush was president, Olmert used to say, if we can make peace with George W. Bush, that'll be good, because Bush has empathy for Israel 67 plus. In other words, some support for an Israel slightly larger than pre-67. And I asked Obama, do you have empathy for Israel 67 plus? And he said, look, you're going to have to decide if having that additional territory is worth the trouble it's going to cause, and the Palestinians are going to have to decide if they want every last inch. That was pretty interesting and kind of set a tone for some of Obama's positions as president. So I think those interviews, I think they can be potentially incredibly interesting, and maybe I'll get the chance to put some questions to Trump. Cool.
So have you kept up with Paul McCartney's children and whether they've had any ongoing involvement with Israel?
Have I kept up with Paul McCartney and his children? Do they have any ongoing involvement with Israel? I encourage you to go read, because I think Stella has been asked stuff about religion. I think she, at some stage, was saying something about being somewhat atheistic and so on, but I would encourage you to read. I don't know. To my knowledge, I don't know that any of them came to Israel. I don't know. I haven't seen anything, but maybe there's stuff out there that I haven't seen. When he came, it was a big deal. I mean, I don't know how you feel about, and how much you internalize about, it's incredible when people come to Israel. It's much easier, when there are pressures on artists, it's easy for them to say no. When the Rolling Stones came, when was the Rolling Stones? Last year? 2 years ago? The Rolling Stones came, and I just thought it was an act of Zionism. They're big enough, and Rod Stewart is big enough to not care if people give them pressure, but still, nonetheless. And how many of you were at the Rolling Stones, by the way? Okay, that's really it. It's us guys. It's the Horovitz family. And I'm going to ask you again, And this time, make the effort, Benji, good man. How many of you were at the Rolling Stones? Really, that's it? Well, you should have gone. You know why you should have gone? Because first of all, they're really, really good. And by the way, they're much older than I am, so I also made a generational shift to go and see them. But they made such an effort. Mick Jagger learned Hebrew, for goodness sake, to play in Israel. At one point on stage, Mick Jagger says to Ronnie Wood, I'm not making this up, do you know any of the people that I'm talking about? Good. Very, very famous musicians from long ago. All around like 69, 70, and 71 now, Mick Jagger turns to Ronnie Wood, these leather-faced elderly gentlemen, and he says to Ronnie, I kid you not, Kanita na'alai ma'ele bashuk? That is not me translating what Mick Jagger said into Hebrew, understand? That is what Mick Jagger said for no reason whatsoever. I mean, Ronnie Wood was wearing red sneakers. They were, interesting shoes, but Kanita na'alai ma'ele bashuk? I mean, so they came to Israel. Well, whatever he answered was not audible because I guess he's not mic'd up, Mick had the. I mean, there was lots of stuff said in Hebrew. They spoke more Hebrew on stage than English, the Rolling Stones. They really did. They made a huge effort, and therefore, how do we get onto this subject? Connections to Israel and so on. So I think it's really great when people come, and I'm not the. If I was going to do anything commercial, I would tell you that next Sunday I'm interviewing Ephraim Halevi at Bet Shmuel, and you should come to that, but that's the end of my commercial interlude that Matthew Kalman will be very pleased with me for highlighting. But apart from going to hear me interview Ephraim Halevi next Sunday, former head of the Mossad, when people come to Israel, like Radiohead this summer, or Alt J, even Aerosmith. Aerosmith coming to Israel? They are, or you want them to? How many of you are going to go to Aerosmith? But 4 of you went to the Rolling Stones. What about Radiohead? How many of you are going to Radiohead? That's right. It's a big deal, and we should support international artists who come and entertain the people of Israel. I think, should we carry on or should we start? It's such a good place to start. One more. Okay, one more. Good. The best answer I've ever gotten in an interview. I'm gonna unlike my normal self, and like many politicians, I'm going to answer a slightly different question, okay? So instead of answering you what's the best answer I got in an interview, I'm going to tell you who was the best interviewee, the most amazing person I ever interviewed. And I'm reckoning that as 6 of you went to the Rolling Stones, 3 of you have heard of this person, okay? Who's heard of Jack Lemmon? Okay, now why have you heard of Jack Lemmon? Huh? You went with his movies. Okay, so lots of people have heard of Jack Lemmon, and very few people went to the Rolling Stones. So we are confounding expectations this evening. Jack Lemmon was in a play that came to Israel by a man called Eugene O'Neill, and I think the play was called The Iceman Cometh, and he was in London doing the play, and he came to Israel. And for those of you who haven't seen Jack Lemmon movies, he was in this movie Some Like It Hot, which is one of the most astoundingly funny and incredible movies of all time. But he was just an amazing person, and you enter the room. I interviewed him like an hour before he was going on stage, or half an hour, when you wouldn't have thought anybody would want to be interviewed, and he was just lovely, and he was really not young. He was for sure in his 70s by then, and he was just incredible. This incredibly energetic, fascinating, funny, wonderful person, and there are people like that. The other amazing person who I haven't interviewed, I'm just going to tell this one last thing, because why shouldn't my wife be embarrassed as well as me this evening? So a few years ago, because she's in the room, yeah, and I'm not going to identify her, but she's somewhere out there thinking, what is he going to say now? So a few years ago, Bill Clinton came to Israel, and my wife doesn't usually come to lots of the events that I go to, but she wanted to come to Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton does this reception before the event where he's speaking. There's 200 people at the reception, and he works the room like nothing on earth. And he's being photographed with everybody, and my wife says to me, "Do you think I could get a photo with Bill Clinton?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's." So we go through the crowd, and we go up to Bill Clinton. We shake hands. He says, "Good evening," and we have a photograph of Bill Clinton, and it's Bill Clinton and Mrs. Horovitz and David Horovitz, like that. And in an ideal world, I know that Mrs. Horovitz would crop out David Horovitz. And it would just, I don't know why I told that story, but because I wanted to end on an upbeat note. Again, thank you all very, very much. Thank you.